Good afternoon. Welcome to the new school. I'm Elizabeth Wyman, and I'm the director of the Institute for Retired Professionals here at the new school, which is known as the IRP. As many of you know, the new school has been devoted to lifelong learning, especially for adults, since 1919, and the IRP was started right here in 1962 and has been here ever since. And over 320 retired professionals conduct our study groups. We call our courses study groups. They teach the study groups. They learn all about the arts, history, politics, economics, etc., and they have a wonderful community. So welcome to all of you. Since 2004, the IRP has sponsored this program called Fridays at 1. And today's Fridays at 1 is very special, as all of you know. We have a full house. And we feature distinguished speakers on diverse and timely topics for IRP members, the new school community, and various other communities in the New York area. Introducing our speaker today is Leslie Herman, who's on the Fridays at 1 committee and is standing in for Ken Whitty today, who's out of town. This is Leslie's 4th term at the IRP, and she and our member Ruth Mackaman, who is checking in people today, will be leading their first study group together in the spring. So, Leslie.
Hi. So I'm going to introduce Orin, who's very impressive. Orin Rudovsky is an award-winning documentary filmmaker specializing in work about individuals and communities outside the mainstream. He has been a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and has produced and directed a number of award-winning films, including A Life Apart about Hasidim in America, and Time for School, which examines the education of 7 children in the developing world. He's currently working on a documentary about Joseph Pulitzer for the American Masters series, as well as a film for Witness Theater about a year-long interaction between high school students and Holocaust survivors. So I'm very pleased to introduce Orin Rudovsky.
Thank you all for being here. It's an auspicious day in a way because I'm bringing this thing, which I think all of you know what it is. It's called a newspaper, but I know people, our children and grandchildren, don't really know that. And that's part of the subject of my film on Joseph Pulitzer as well. But today or yesterday was the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Balfour Declaration, which for many Jews around the world was a moment of celebration, and for many Palestinians in the Middle East was not such a moment of celebration. And 100 years later, this understatement of a headline, I think it should be rewritten, it says, at 100, still divisive in Israel. That's sort of an Onion title. Obviously, yes, very divisive. This film is an attempt to talk about the mega-narrative of Israeli-Palestinian relations by telling a story that is much a microcosm of the conflict, as told by my partner in filmmaking in this film, Menachem Daum, who appears in the film, and Yaqub Odeh, who was a resident of Lifta. And it's a very personal story about the struggle to find a way to connect, and through connection, hopefully, to find a way to understanding, and through understanding, possibly other good things can happen, but don't seem to. Anyway, the film runs 75 minutes, and afterwards we'll have a Q&A, and I look forward to answering your questions. And please, questions, not statements, just questions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we do have time for questions, and there are refreshments. So Orin is available for questions. Orin? And we ask you to come up to the mics, please.
There are mics on either side if you can. So if you can walk over to them, that would be great.
Yes.
Yes.
I want to congratulate you on giving a voice to people that we so little are given the opportunity of hearing. This was a brilliant, brilliant piece of work. What has been the reaction in this country from people who are interested in Israel?
Thank you. Thank you. He was not a plant. Well, you know, everything gets drowned out in this country on a lot of topics. So Israel is one of those that actually this film has been received well across the spectrum. In other words, people who generally are one would call of the right don't necessarily object so strongly to this film because they still see an adversary in Yaqub. It's all a matter of what you see and how you see it. So I just wish it were shown more and played more, but it's an ongoing conflict in the mega sense and also in the microcosm of Lifta. Just last week, I mean, everything gets boiled down to very minute things that prevent what I would call progress and what other people on the other side would call progress in the legal battle to just because, you know, it's nice to hear and heartening that UNESCO chose Lifta as a site, but if you read further about getting chosen as a UNESCO site, what that really means is there's no military might behind that on the side of UNESCO, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it will not get developed anyway. Yeah, and we don't recognize UNESCO anymore. If you have a question, please come to the mics. Yes. Oh, sorry, your turn. Or I don't know.
I was here.
Oh, you were there
Then I
first.
sat down.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
See how we can, you know, we could spend the whole time arguing
Okay.
about that.
I was reminded of my promised land with Ari Sharon, was it?
Ari Shavit.
Yeah, where he described how the Palestinians were escorted out by the Israeli army from a village where they cooperated and had orange groves and things with the Israelis for many years. And the central government had ordered this because they were worried about the Palestinian power that would come and force the Palestinians to, you know, take up arms and things. I was wondering if that's a consideration, although I really believe this town should be revived. But there's so much bitterness that's built up that you don't know what, you know.
Yeah, I hear your question. Well, keep in mind there are 1.5 or 7 or I don't. I'm sure I'm wrong about that. Million Palestinian Israelis throughout Israel who are citizens and who are relatively, you know, there's
And in the Knesset.
and in the Knesset. So this town at the time it was at a central junction, and it still is on the route to Jerusalem. But that's not the. There's no security issue at this point. It's purely, you know, to some degree, financial development issues and desires. As anybody who's been to Jerusalem in the last 20 years or 40 years knows that property values are sky high, and every inch of land is getting used up. So that's really what's more at stake. And then the political considerations and making a statement. Both sides want to make a statement. So it doesn't have anything, as far as I know, to do with security. I'm just going to keep going.
Okay.
No, yeah.
Thank you. I was in Israel a couple of weeks ago, and we drove from Caesarea to the Sea of Galilee. On the road going, it seemed like there were many new villages, and I identified them as probably Israeli Palestinians because there was a mosque in each one. My question is, are there any examples, so these were new, I think, are there any examples of Arabs and Jews, Israelis, trying to live together now or create any new communities together?
There are a very, well, as if you've been to Haifa primarily, and also parts of Jerusalem, there are in many neighborhoods, and it depends a bit on socioeconomics more than anything else, but Palestinians and Jews living side by side, and there's negative examples of what you're saying in East Jerusalem because Israel's developing places to live for Orthodox people right in the heart of Palestinian neighborhoods, the same way Yaqub's town, where he grew up, has been renamed Lehi Street, and the worst thing he could possibly have is, it'd be like I don't want to make a faux pas here in terms of what a street on the West End and I don't want to make a faux pas and call it some Holocaust thing street, but you know what I mean. It's not. I don't want. I already went there, so I shouldn't have. So, but anyway, there are some small examples of cooperation. There's some small towns where there are that kind of living situation, but it's very, very few. Yes.
There were references to the occupation, and my impression is that when we hear about the occupation and you read it in the newspapers, you're talking about the West Bank, but when there's a reference here by the Palestinian to the occupation, is he not talking about Israel?
Well, that kind of is the crux of the matter. It's a very, very good question. What are Yaqub's particular politics, and what are the nuances of it? And when there's the occupation, which is for most of us means the occupation of the beyond the Green Line of the post-1967 territories, which includes East Jerusalem and the West Bank, or other people would call it Samaria and Judea. And when Yaqub talks about the occupation, I think he is talking in a broader terms about that. And I believe, though we decided not to get into all the details of it, that his perspective is a one-state solution, which is in line with a lot of right-wing religious Jews at this point, except he would want a democratic one-state solution where Palestinians and Jews throughout the land have equal rights. And that has become something of a rallying cry among a lot of religious and right-wingers, and among a small group of left-wingers and Palestinians as well. And it's become increasingly more complicated. And question of who wins in the end. And,
He implied that when he talked about a state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. He wasn't talking about a Jewish state.
Yeah, he wasn't talking about a Jewish state. However, a lot of Jews aren't talking about it either now. And some are, there's many delineations which all amount to one version or another of potentially a democratic state. And there are people of good hearts and minds who actually think that is the only solution. But but I'm not sure.
Hi.
I'm still a two-stater.
There's something I don't understand about the way this narrative is told, not only by you, but in general, and I'm hoping that you can explain this to me. Why, when we're talking about this kind of thing, especially the creation of refugees, why do we leave out the part where hundreds of thousands of Jews are kicked out of Arab countries, of Egypt, Libya, Syria, Iraq, and all of those other countries? How could that not be part of the story of refugees?
Well, that is because that is a whole film in and of itself. Because while we all know that there was anti-Semitism in the Arab world, the form of anti-Semitism in the Arab world pre-48 was pretty tame by Western. That is true, but that's another. Before 48, relatively tame, and I would take it further. I would say extremely tame compared to what happened in Russia and Poland and other places. That is what I'm talking about, and let's not blame the Arabs for being as bad as our French, Polish, German, Russian, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, etc. friends who we are very friendly with today, and they don't have the Jewish problem for a good reason, because they killed them or kicked them out. So let's just be a little more sensitive to those issues, and I would fight back also on what happened in 48. But that is a long conversation, which we'll just start throwing things at each other, which I don't suggest. But you should really research it deeply, what the Israeli state did in 48.
I have two issues that I'd like to ask you about. Number one, since there are several groups in Israel that really are working together with Palestinians, do they know about this project? Are you involved in any way with them? The second question I want to ask is whether your project is something that is discussed in the schools. Is it discussed in the Israeli schools? Is it discussed in the Palestinian schools?
You know, in terms of contact with, we've been working directly with the coalition for Lifta, and they have shown the film in Israel. But this is a very, in the school systems, and there are a lot of other great films. We're not, you know, that have delved into these topics in depth. In terms of the Israeli school system, the curriculum is very heavily controlled, and if you talk to Israelis who have been through the school system, the Zionist narrative is a very, very, very narrow one. There are people like Hillel Cohen and Benny Morris and others who have delved into Israeli archives and written books about the topics, but in Israeli through high school, there's very little of that filters in. In college and university, there's very healthy debate, and Israeli Palestinians go in significant numbers to Israeli universities and get PhDs and masters and write books, and you know, so there's a thriving culture and discussion, which is what makes Israel very different than any of its Arab neighbors, which is it's still a thriving democracy where one could say on the subject of Israel, people are much more willing and able to speak their minds than they can in the U.S. Congress or Senate or in the pages of the newspapers here. There's a much more vigorous and lively debate, I would say, by a long shot. It's not even close. So, you know, these things get shut down here. I mean, my daughter goes to Oberlin College, which is, you know, exactly. Lots of misinformation about it. But I was at an introduction to the president of Oberlin College a few weeks ago, and people lined up to ask questions about this new president. And 4 of the first 10 questions were about anti-Zionism on campus. So it's a very tense, and you know, just judging by your applause to the thing about refugees coming from Arab countries, this is viscerally something that drives our hearts to such a degree that it's hard to keep open to the vagaries of what's going on. So yes.
I am personally very liberal and left-wing in my politics here. When it comes to Israel, my heart is with Israel, and I'm very right-wing with politics. I found your film to be important topic, but very biased. Any Israeli you represented was totally for the coming in and developing this small town. Anyone who was questioning and was opposed to it was extremely right-wing and visceral. And bringing in the whole Holocaust theme throughout your documentary, it kind of like puts the Palestinian cause in retrospective to the Holocaust, and that's not fair, because they're not being blamed or punished because of the Holocaust. Yes, there was a big immigration that came into Israel during those periods, but one thing has nothing to do with the other, and by bringing in constantly the theme of Holocaust, I think you were trying to say, okay, Israelis are putting the Palestinian situation in the same retrospective, and now they're victims themselves. So I enjoyed the topic of the small and bringing this Brooklyn Jewish guy here that really doesn't have any experience in Israel other than a few family members. Everything was a strange juxtaposition to me in the film.
Well, I'm sorry you felt that way. I would say that we are in no way trying to equate the Holocaust with the Palestinian Nakba, and I think we make that clear. The point is this, that Jewish characters, Jewish people, and many of us feel this, who came to Israel and whose families were wiped out, often equated, and all you have to do is go to many Jewish neighborhoods in this country and listen to many older Jews who will say, the Arabs, Yimach Shemam, they're just like the Nazis. And, I have relatives, many of my relatives, who will say the same thing. You mentioned the word Palestinian, and frankly, it's equated by them with Nazis. I'm not doing that. And if the film's doing that, I think you're misreading it. And I can understand we had to bring up the Holocaust because the Holocaust is central to understanding the topic. And Yaqub and Dasha have that conversation, and I think to some degree clarify it. I understand you don't feel like we do at all, and that's fine. But that's what we were trying to do.
Hi, I want to say that I didn't find it biased. I found that what you were saying was that we have all had problems. We have had terrible problems historically, some worse than others. But let's all get together and see if we can work them out together and understand each other. And I really have to applaud you for that.
Thank you. Well, obviously I'm disappointed that the film triggers that in you, because that is the opposite, really, of what we feel. I mean, Menachem is the child of survivors, and it's his impetus to make this film, and it's really the reason we included the segment from another film, which I really highly recommend to you, and I think you'll like better, is called Hiding and Seeking, which is a visit by him and his family to Poland to meet the Polish farmers who hid his family. But that context is the context. There is no way to approach the subject of Israel and our desire and my desire, strong desire for there to be a Jewish state and a haven for the Jewish people without knowing the history of the pogroms in Europe and 2,000 years of Jewish history, continuing to Charlottesville just 2 months ago. So if that context, and strange to say, but I believe if Israel didn't exist and Charlottesville happened, we would have had an even stronger reaction to it, because the fear would not just be visceral, but it would be real. So anyway, the Sephardic, okay. Anyway, no, that's a long conversation. It's worth having, but not like this. I just wanted to say that we are very sensitive to, and the film can't have everything in it. It is a microcosm of a situation. It's about real people with real experience, which we're presenting their real experience. We're not And you can watch my other film about the topic and see if you feel like that's more balanced. It's called Colliding Dreams, and it really delves much more deeply into all the questions several people have asked. So I'll just take one more and happy to talk afterwards. I mean, I could take more, but it looks like people are ready to go.
Yes. I enjoyed the film very much, and I struggle with my position. And I was reminded of Jacob's feeling that if you were abused as a child, you tend to abuse, when you grow up. And his point, similar, was, well, if you were displaced from your home, in the middle of your life, wouldn't you feel why would you want to do that to anybody else? And yet, I wonder if you drew any parallels with the Pakistani-Indian partition, also in 1948, where India was divided into Pakistan, and millions of people were displaced, and there was a lot of fighting. But I don't hear today any movement in Pakistan to reclaim parts of India. The country seemed to have, suffered the trauma of partition and then moved on, and they've created their own separate countries.
Well, let me just say, in that case, they both have countries. Palestinians, let's correct the misconception that Palestinians are just as happy in Saudi Arabia or in Egypt or in another country. They do have, and partially because of the Jews, perhaps, they have an identity as Palestinians. That situation is more akin, I would say, to that, in the last few months, the Rohingya, 600,000 Rohingya have been summarily kicked out and massacred on their way out of the country. And so let's keep in mind also on the other side that whatever Israel did in the War of 48 or in 67, there were few massacres both sides. But in general, Jewish treatment, though far from perfect, of the Palestinians, there are 1.6 million Israeli Arab citizens who are increasingly getting more and more civil rights. There's an attempt, though a lot of people would condemn it, for there to be law and order in the West Bank. It's a matter of grays. It's not what the Americans did to the Native Americans or what, So we have to really understand that I think most Jews and Israelis have been all along trying to figure out a way to accommodate, and neither side has been a particularly good partner to that. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Orin, for coming and for showing the film. And please come and stay for some refreshments. Thank you.